May 5, 1821. Longwood House, St. Helena Island, South Atlantic Ocean. 28 people stand in and around a damp, rotting room, watching a man die. His face is swollen, yellowish, and covered with sweat. His body shakes. He throws up black liquid into a bowl held by a servant. The smell of sickness fills the air. Throw up, sweat, and rot. He weighs maybe 160 pounds, down from 180. His hair has become thin and gray. When he opens his eyes, they can't focus and see nothing. He speaks without making sense. Sometimes French, sometimes Italian, sometimes just sounds. Josephine, where is Josephine? Push forward the guard. Tell France, the army. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who once controlled the lives of 70 million Europeans. The man who crowned himself emperor while the Pope watched silently. The man who made his brothers kings and redrew the map of Europe with his sword. He's dying in a converted barn on a rock in the middle of nowhere. The 28 people watching aren't government ministers. Not French generals. Not the kings and princes who once competed for his attention. There are 4 French followers who went with him into exile, a handful of servants, British guards assigned to watch him, 2 doctors arguing over his treatment, and several enslaved workers from the island. From 70 million to 28. 6 years ago, we watched 600,000 men die in the Russian winter. We saw the largest army ever put together destroyed, not by a single battle, but by hunger, disease, cold, and the hugeness of Russia itself. We watched Napoleon's empire begin to fall apart. But that story ended with his first exile to Elba. What we didn't see was what came after. The escape, the final battle, the final defeat, and the 6 years of terrible suffering that followed, where the British Empire, unable to kill him on the battlefield, destroyed him slowly. Anyway, before we go further, I need to ask for your help. If you think this story matters, if understanding how power destroys and how memory survives matters, leave a like and drop a comment. These stories take weeks to research and produce. Your engagement helps them reach people who need to hear them. Napoleon's fall from total power to this death room teaches us something we still haven't learned about ambition, limits, and the price of defying empires. This is the story of Napoleon's brutal end, how the man who survived Russia, who escaped from one exile and retook France without firing a shot, ended up here, dying alone, speaking without sense, with only 28 people left who cared enough to watch. To understand this death, we need to go back to the final battle. February 26, 1815, 6 years before that death room. Napoleon stands on the deck of a small ship called the Inconstant, watching the coast of France appear through morning fog. He has 1,028 men with him. 4 cannons, some muskets. That's it. He's about to attempt something that should be suicide, retake France from a restored monarchy backed by all of Europe. 9 months ago, after the Russian disaster and the defeats that followed, the coalition powers exiled him to Elba, a small Mediterranean island off the Italian coast. They gave him the title Emperor of Elba. 12 miles of territory, 12,000 subjects, a pension, a tiny guard of 400 soldiers. It was supposed to be enough, a comfortable retirement for a man who once ruled 70 million. It wasn't. Napoleon spent those 9 months reading smuggled French newspapers. King Louis XVIII, restored to the throne by the coalition, was wildly unpopular. The old nobility had returned, demanding their estates back. Veterans of Napoleon's armies were pushed aside, pensions cut. France was humiliated by the peace terms, reduced borders, occupied territory, massive payments. And Napoleon was 45 years old, watching his legacy dissolve from an island prison. So he escaped. Now the ship lands at Golfe-Juan on the southern French coast. Napoleon and his 1,028 men begin marching north toward Paris, 600 miles away. No supply train, no reinforcements, no plan beyond. March to the capital and see what happens. It should end in his arrest and execution within a week. March 7, 1815, near Grenoble. The 5th Regiment of the Line, 1,500 royalist soldiers loyal to King Louis XVIII, blocks the road north. Their orders are clear: Stop Napoleon. Bring him back to Paris in chains. Napoleon's tiny force stops. They're outnumbered, outgunned. If the 5th Regiment opens fire, this dies here. Napoleon walks forward alone, unarmed. He stops 20 paces from the Royalist line and opens his coat, showing his chest. Soldiers of the 5th, if there is one among you who wishes to kill his emperor, here I am. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. Then a soldier in the Royalist line shouts, "Vive l'Empereur!" The entire regiment breaks ranks and rushes toward Napoleon. Officers try to stop them. It's useless. Within minutes, 1,500 Royalist soldiers have joined Napoleon's march on Paris. It happens again the next day and the day after. Regiment after regiment sent to stop him instead joins him. Marshal Michel Ney, one of Napoleon's former commanders who swore loyalty to Louis XVIII after the exile, promises the king he'll bring Napoleon back in an iron cage. When Ney's force meets Napoleon on March 14 near Auxerre, Ney meets his former emperor on the road. He falls to his knees, weeping. By March 20, Napoleon enters Paris without firing a single shot. Louis XVIII has already fled to Belgium. The empire has been restored. Crowds line the streets cheering. Veterans weep openly. Napoleon is emperor again. 20 days from landing with barely 1,000 men to retaking the throne of France. March 25, 1815. Vienna, Austria. The coalition powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, are meeting at the Congress of Vienna, redrawing Europe's map. When news arrives that Napoleon has retaken France, the room goes silent. Then Tsar Alexander of Russia speaks. Bonaparte has placed himself outside civil and social relations. He has shown the world that there can be neither peace nor truce with him. Within 48 hours, the 7th Coalition forms. Over 700,000 troops begin gathering. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, every major power commits armies. The goal is not negotiation this time. It's complete destruction. Napoleon, back in Paris, reads the intelligence reports. France can field maybe 280,000 troops. Many are untrained new soldiers. Many are exhausted veterans who've been fighting for 20 years. Equipment is limited. Fortresses are undermanned. He cannot defeat all of Europe. The math is impossible. But he doesn't need to defeat everyone. He needs to destroy the closest armies before they can unite. The British under Wellington are in Belgium. The Prussians under Blücher are nearby. If he can crush both before the Austrians and Russians arrive from the east, he might shatter coalition unity, force negotiations, maybe, if everything breaks right, survive. One decisive battle. That's all he needs. It's the only chance he has. June 16, 1815. Ligny, Belgium. Napoleon attacks Blücher's Prussian army. The fighting is vicious, village-to-village combat in wheat fields and streets. By nightfall, the Prussians retreat with roughly 25,000 casualties. French losses are nearly as heavy, 13,500 dead and wounded. But Napoleon believes he's crippled the Prussian army. He sends Marshal Grouchy with 33,000 men to pursue and prevent them from regrouping. It's a critical mistake. Grouchy will spend the next 2 days chasing Prussian rearguards while the main Prussian force regroups intact and marches west. Napoleon doesn't know this yet. On June 17, he turns north toward Wellington's British army. Wellington has positioned his forces on a ridge near a small village called Waterloo, about 12 miles south of Brussels. Wellington commands roughly 68,000 troops, British, Dutch, Belgian, German allies. Napoleon has approximately 72,000. The numbers are close, dangerously close, but Napoleon is confident. Wellington has never faced him in battle before. British infantry is solid, but he's beaten better. That night, heavy rain falls. The ground turns to thick mud. June 18, 1815. Dawn. Napoleon surveys the British position through his telescope. Wellington's army holds a low ridge. Infantry positioned just behind the crest in defensive formations. Artillery on high ground. The flanks are protected by two fortified farms, Hougoumont on the right, La Haye-Saint in the center. It's a strong position, but breakable. The problem is the mud. French artillery, Napoleon's decisive weapon in most battles, can't move into position. Guns sink axle deep. Horses strain and slip. Cannonballs that should skip across the ground and tear through enemy ranks instead bury themselves in soft earth. Napoleon delays the attack, waiting for the ground to dry. It costs him 4 hours. At 11:30 a.m., French artillery finally opens fire. 80 guns bombard Wellington's ridge. The noise is like thunder. Smoke rises in black clouds. But Wellington's infantry, positioned just behind the ridge crest, is mostly protected. Cannonballs pass overhead or sink into mud. At 1 p.m., Napoleon orders the first assault. Prince Jerome's division, about 6,500 men, attacks Hougoumont, the fortified farm on Wellington's right flank. The plan is simple: draw British reserves away from the center, then break through the weakened line. But the assault turns into a slaughter. French infantry charge the farm's stone walls again and again. British guards fire from windows and barricades. Bodies pile in the courtyard. The fight drags on for hours. Jerome keeps feeding men into the attack, forgetting it was supposed to be a distraction. Napoleon watches. He doesn't intervene. Maybe he's distracted. Maybe he's ill. Witnesses report he's moving stiffly, visibly in pain. At 2 p.m., Marshal Ney launches a massive cavalry charge at Wellington Center. Thousands of French horsemen, cuirassiers in steel breastplates, dragoons, lancers, thunder up the slope. British infantry forms defensive squares, tight formations, bayonets facing outward. When the French cavalry reaches them, the British fire point-blank volleys into the horses. Animals scream and collapse. Riders are thrown, trampled. The squares hold. Ney pulls back, reforms, charges again. Same result. He charges 6 times over the next 2 hours. 6 times the British squares hold. French cavalry is being destroyed. Thousands of horses dead. Riders cut down for nothing. Wellington's line bends but doesn't break. 4 p.m. A scout reaches Napoleon with a message. Prussian forces spotted approaching from the east. Blücher wasn't crippled at Ligny. His army regrouped faster than anyone expected, and Grouchy, who was supposed to be preventing exactly this, is miles away, chasing ghosts. Napoleon now faces 2 armies. If the Prussians hit his right flank while Wellington pins his front, the French will be crushed between them. He sends 14,000 men to hold off the Prussians. It weakens his attack on Wellington, but there's no choice. At 6:30 p.m., French infantry finally captures La Haye-Saint, the fortified farm in Wellington Center. For the first time, there's a real gap in the British line. Marshal Ney sees it. He rides to Napoleon, desperate. "Give me the guard and I'll finish this." Napoleon hesitates. The Imperial Guard, his elite reserve of 20,000 veterans who have never lost a battle, is his last intact force. If he commits them and it fails, there's nothing left. But the Prussians are arriving in increasing numbers. Wellington's line is weakening but hasn't collapsed. The window is closing. At 7 p.m., Napoleon commits the guard. 7:15 p.m. 5 battalions of the Imperial Guard, roughly 3,500 men, advance up the ridge toward Wellington's center. Grenadiers and chasseurs, veterans of Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland, men who've never tasted defeat. They march through artillery fire in perfect formation. Shells explode among them. Men fall. The guard keeps moving. They reach the crest. Then Wellington gives an order to the British 1st Foot Guards lying in the grass just behind the ridgeline, where French scouts hadn't seen them. "Stand up. Fire." 1,500 British infantry rise from hiding. At 15 paces, they fire directly into the Imperial Guard's front ranks. The front of the column disintegrates. Officers fall. The formation staggers. A second volley. A third. The Imperial Guard, undefeated in 20 years, breaks. They retreat down the slope. Someone in the French army screams, "La garde recule!" The guard retreats. The words spread like fire. If the guard can break, nothing is safe. Panic erupts across the French line. Infantry throw down muskets. Cavalry abandons positions. Artillery crews flee their guns. Wellington orders a general advance. The entire British line surges forward. From the east, 50,000 Prussians smash into the French right flank. The French army doesn't retreat. It disintegrates. Men trample each other trying to escape. Officers scream orders nobody hears. Entire units simply vanish into the chaos. Napoleon, surrounded by a few remaining Guard soldiers, watches his army collapse in real time. Marshal Soult grabs his arm. "Sire, we leave now, or we don't leave at all." They ride south through the darkness toward France. Behind them, 25,000 French dead and wounded. Another 8,000 captured. The road littered with abandoned guns, supply wagons, regimental eagles. The empire Napoleon restored 94 days ago just died on a Belgian ridge. Now comes the question, what do you do when you've lost everything twice? June 21, 1815. Malmaison, outside Paris. Napoleon arrives at Josephine's old estate with maybe 200 followers. Josephine has been dead for a year, but the house still feels like hers. He takes her old rooms. Paris is in chaos. The Chamber of Deputies, France's legislative body, is meeting in emergency session. Coalition armies are marching on France from Belgium. The nation cannot survive another occupation, another round of payments, another humiliation. The deputies send a group to Malmaison with a single message: abdicate or we'll declare you removed from power. Napoleon tries to negotiate. "I'll abdicate in favor of my son, Napoleon II, Emperor of the French, with a regency council until he comes of age." The delegates listen politely. Then they return to Paris and invite Louis XVIII back from Belgium. On June 22, 1815, 4 days after Waterloo, Napoleon signs his second abdication. No son on the throne, no conditions, no legacy. Just, "I quit." He has maybe a week before coalition forces reach Paris, maybe less. He needs to move. 4 options. Option 1, America. Sail to the United States or South America. Start over. Live as a private citizen. Maybe write. Maybe offer military advice to whatever government would have him. Thomas Jefferson supposedly said he'd welcome Napoleon to America. It's a new life. Freedom. The problem: getting there. British naval squadrons are blocking every French port. Running the blockade means risking capture at sea or being sunk. And even if he reaches America, how long before European powers pressure the US to hand him over? Option 2. Austria. His wife, Marie-Louise, is the daughter of the Austrian emperor. Technically, Napoleon is family. Throw himself on his father-in-law's mercy. Request asylum in Vienna. The problem: humiliating. Austria was his enemy for decades, and Marie-Louise hasn't written to him since his first exile. She's already taken a lover, an Austrian general. The Austrian court wants Napoleon gone, not living in their palace. Option 3. Stay in France. Disappear into the countryside. Live under a false name. Retire quietly. The problem: impossible. The Bourbons will hunt him. The coalition has made clear he cannot remain in Europe. Staying means arrest, trial, likely execution. Option 4. Britain. Surrender to the British. Request asylum. Appeal to their sense of honor. He came aboard their ship voluntarily, seeking protection, not as a captured enemy. The problem: trusting the British. July 3, 1815. Napoleon chooses Britain. He travels to Rochefort on the Atlantic coast with a small group of followers. 2 French frigates are in the harbor, theoretically available to attempt a run to America. But the harbor mouth is blockaded by ships of the Royal Navy under Commodore Sir Frederick Maitland. Napoleon sends an officer to the British flagship, HMS Bellerophon, with a message requesting safe passage to America, or if that's impossible, asylum in Britain. He writes a letter to the Prince Regent. Your Royal Highness, exposed to the factions which divide my country and to the hostility of the greatest powers of Europe, I have ended my political career, and I come, like Themistocles, to throw myself upon the hospitality of the British people. I place myself under the protection of their laws. It's carefully worded. Themistocles was an Athenian general who, after being exiled by his own people, sought refuge with former enemies and was granted honorable asylum. The comparison is intentional. I'm a great man undone by lesser politicians, seeking honor among honorable foes. Maitland reads the letter. He sends back a polite reply. He cannot grant passage to America without orders from London. But if Napoleon wishes to come aboard, he will be treated with respect while awaiting instructions from the British government. It's not a promise of asylum, but it's not a refusal either. Napoleon makes his decision. On July 15, he boards HMS Bellerophon with about 50 followers, generals, servants, loyalists who refuse to abandon him. The moment his foot touches the British deck, everything changes. July 15th to 24th. Aboard HMS Bellerophon. Napoleon is given the captain's cabin. British officers treat him with formal courtesy. He dines with them. Conversations are polite, even friendly, and Napoleon is charming. He asks officers about their families, discusses naval tactics, compliments the ship's discipline, shows genuine interest in their careers. He's witty, intelligent, gracious, no bitterness, no anger. British officers who spent years fighting him find themselves actually liking him. Captain Maitland writes in his journal. He possesses a facility of making a favorable impression upon those with whom he converses. On July 24th, the Bellerophon anchors off Torbay on the English coast. Word spreads that Napoleon is aboard. Thousands of British civilians row out in small boats. They want to see him, the man who terrified Europe for 2 decades. Napoleon appears on deck. Waves. They cheer. He's already becoming a legend. The defeated emperor. The tragic hero. The man who rose from nothing and nearly conquered everything. Napoleon allows himself to believe this will work. The British public clearly doesn't hate him. The officers respect him. Surely the government will grant asylum. Maybe a country estate, somewhere quiet where he can write his memoirs. He's convinced himself he's a guest, not a prisoner. July 31st. Plymouth Harbor. The Bellerophon moves to Plymouth and anchors under heavy guard. More crowds gather, more boats row out, more cheering. But no word from London about asylum. Napoleon's followers start to worry. General Gourgaud asks Captain Maitland directly, "What are the government's intentions?" Maitland's answer is careful, "I'm awaiting orders." Days pass. Still no word. Then on August 4th, Admiral Sir George Keith boards the Bellerophon. He carries the British government's official decision. August 4th, 1815. Keith enters the captain's cabin where Napoleon is waiting with his senior followers. He doesn't sit. He reads from a prepared statement. By order of His Majesty's government, General Napoleon Bonaparte is to be removed to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean. He will reside there under the supervision of a British governor for the remainder of his life. A house will be provided. He may bring a small household. All expenses will be covered by the British Crown. Silence. Then Napoleon explodes. This is a violation of British honor. I came aboard this ship voluntarily. I placed myself under the protection of British law. I am not a prisoner of war. I surrendered seeking asylum. Keith's response is ice. You are a prisoner of the British Crown. The decision is final. Where is St. Helena? A British possession. South Atlantic. Approximately 1,200 miles from the nearest continent. You're sending me to a rock in the middle of the ocean? His Majesty's government believes it is the most secure location. Napoleon turns to his followers. This is kidnapping. They lured me aboard under false pretenses. I demand to see a lawyer. I demand to appeal to Parliament. I have rights under British common law. Keith doesn't argue. He simply repeats, the decision is final. You will be transferred to HMS Northumberland tomorrow. The ship sails for St. Helena within the week. August 5th to 7th. Napoleon spends 3 days writing furious protests, letters to the Prince Regent, to Parliament, to anyone who might intervene. He invokes international law, British hospitality traditions, the rights of political refugees. He threatens to refuse to leave the ship, force them to drag him off in chains so the world can see how Britain treats those who trust its honor. None of it matters. On August 7th, he's transferred to HMS Northumberland, a larger warship prepared for the 10-week voyage south. He's allowed to choose who comes with him. Most of his followers decline. They have families, lives. France is still home. In the end, 28 people agree to follow him into permanent exile. Count Henri Bertrand, former Grand Marshal of the Palace, with his wife and children. General Gaspard Gourgaud. Count Charles de Montholon and his wife. Emmanuel Las Cases, who will serve as secretary. A handful of servants. 28 people. That's what's left of the empire. The Northumberland weighs anchor on August 8th. Napoleon stands on deck, watching England disappear behind him. He will never see Europe again. The trap has closed, and the British are about to teach him that there are worse things than execution. August 8, 1815. HMS Northumberland, departing England. 10 weeks at sea. That's how long it takes to reach St. Helena from England. The Northumberland is a 74-gun ship of the line. Crew of 750. Napoleon and his household of 28 are assigned cabins below deck. He gets a small suite, bedroom, sitting room. The Bertrands take adjoining cabins. Montholon and his wife nearby. Gourgaud and Las Cases share smaller quarters. The servants are crammed wherever space exists. For the first few days, Napoleon stays in his cabin. Doesn't eat, doesn't speak, just lies in his berth, staring at the wooden ceiling while the ship rocks. Bertrand tries to talk to him. Napoleon doesn't respond. On the 4th day, he emerges, asks for breakfast, requests books from the ship's small library, begins taking walks on deck under British Guard supervision. He's adjusting, or pretending to. August 15th. Bay of Biscay. The ship crosses the Bay of Biscay in rough weather. Waves crash over the bow. The vessel pitches and rolls. Most of Napoleon's household gets violently seasick. Napoleon doesn't. He's been on ships before, during his Egyptian campaign. He walks the deck in the storm, coat whipping in the wind, watching the grey water. A British midshipman on watch later writes in his journal. He stood at the rail for near an hour, staring at the waves as if trying to will the ship to turn around. August 20th to September 15th. Open Atlantic. The days settle into routine. Napoleon wakes around 8 a.m. breakfast in his cabin. Coffee, bread, sometimes fruit. Then he reads. History, mostly. Plutarch, Caesar's Gallic Wars, biographies of Alexander the Great. Around noon, he emerges on deck for exercise. British regulations require he stay within a designated area under guard observation. He paces back and forth, sometimes for 2 hours straight. At 4 p.m., dinner with his household and select British officers. The ship's captain, Rear Admiral Sir George Cockburn, dines with them several times per week. Napoleon performs during these dinners. He's witty, tells campaign stories, asks the British officers about their service. He wants them to like him, needs them to see him as a great man fallen on hard times, not a dangerous prisoner. It half works. The officers respect him, but they don't forget what he is. After dinner, Napoleon plays cards with Bertrand and Montholon. Whist, usually. Small stakes. He cheats occasionally, moves cards when no one's looking. When caught, he laughs. In War and Cards, all strategies are permitted. By 10 p.m., he's back in his cabin. Sometimes he dictates memoir notes to lost cases. Sometimes he just lies in the dark, listening to the ship creak. The routine is mind-numbing. The same conversations, the same pacing, the same card games, day after day after day. And every day takes him further from Europe. September 23rd. Crossing the equator. British naval tradition: when a ship crosses the equator, the crew performs a ritual, crossing the line. Sailors who've never crossed before get dunked in water, shaved with wooden razors, subjected to mock trials. The crew asks if Napoleon wants to participate. He declines, stays in his cabin. That night, Gourgaud finds him staring at maps. Maps of Europe. Maps of France. Gourgaud asks what he's doing. Calculating how far we are from Paris. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. The distance is roughly 5,000 miles and growing. October 10th. South Atlantic. The temperature drops. They're in the southern hemisphere now, heading into spring. The water turns from blue to gray-green. Seabirds appear, albatrosses following the ship. Napoleon spends more time on deck. The horizon is empty in every direction. No land, no other ships, just water and sky. One afternoon, Admiral Cockburn joins him at the rail. How much longer? Napoleon asks. 5 days, perhaps 6 if the wind turns. And what happens when we arrive? You'll be taken to Longwood House. It's been prepared for your residence. A house. Yes. On a rock. St. Helena is a British possession. It's been inhabited for over a century. There's a town, Jamestown, a garrison, farms. It's not uninhabited. But it is a prison. Cockburn doesn't answer immediately. Then, it is what you make it, sir. Napoleon turns away. No. It is what you have made it. October 15th, 1815. First sight of St. Helena. Dawn. A lookout shouts, "Land ho!" Napoleon is already on deck. He's been awake since 4 a.m., unable to sleep. The island emerges from morning mist. It's volcanic, a mass of black and brown rock thrust up from the ocean. Sheer cliffs rise 600, 700 feet straight from the water. The rock face is jagged, hostile. No beaches visible from this angle, no harbors, just cliffs. As the ship sails closer, Napoleon can see green at the top, vegetation on the interior plateau, but the coastline is fortress walls of stone. The Northumberland rounds the northern point and approaches the only anchorage, a small bay on the northwest side. A town clings to the base of the cliffs, Jamestown. Maybe 500 buildings stacked up a narrow valley. A fort overlooks the harbor. This is St. Helena. 10 miles long, 6 miles wide. 1,200 miles from the nearest continent. The trap doesn't need bars. October 17th. Disembarkation. Napoleon is rowed ashore with his household. Crowds of British soldiers and local civilians line the dock. They stare in silence as he steps onto land for the first time in 10 weeks. He's brought to a temporary residence in Jamestown, a merchant's house, while Longwood House is being prepared. The room is small, poorly ventilated, hot. The island's climate is strange, humid, oppressive heat during the day, then sudden cold winds at night. Napoleon stays in the Jamestown house for 2 months while work continues on Longwood. During this time, he's allowed short trips around the island under heavy guard. He rides to see the interior. The island is more livable than he expected. Farms, orchards, some decent roads. But it's still a cage. Every road ends at a cliff or a guard post. British sentries are everywhere. On one ride, he asks his British escort, "How many troops garrison this island?" "Nearly 3,000, sir. 3,000 soldiers to guard 1 man. December 10th, 1815. Longwood House. Napoleon is finally taken to his permanent residence. Longwood sits on a plateau about 1,800 feet above sea level on the island's eastern side. The carriage climbs a winding road. When they crest the plateau, Napoleon sees the house. It's low, sprawling, single-story mostly. Originally built as a barn for the lieutenant governor's livestock, then converted to housing for the deputy governor, now hastily expanded for Napoleon. The location is exposed. Constant wind whips across the plateau. No trees nearby for shelter. The house sits alone on barren ground. Napoleon steps out of the carriage. The wind immediately hits him, strong, steady, carrying moisture from the ocean. He walks to the house entrance. British soldiers stand guard. Inside, the rooms smell of fresh paint and mildew. About 20 rooms total, but several are barely usable. The walls are thin, the ceilings low, the windows small. Bertrand and his family will take the east wing. Montholon the west. Napoleon gets a bedroom, a study, a billiard room, a drawing room. The servants are packed into remaining spaces. This is the empire now. Napoleon walks through his assigned rooms. In the bedroom, he finds a camp bed, the same type he used on campaign. Someone's idea of consideration. He sits on it. The frame creaks. From the window, he can see British sentries pacing the perimeter. Beyond them, the plateau drops away to cliffs and ocean. Miles of empty water stretching to the horizon. He stays at the window for a long time. Bertrand enters. "Sire, where would you like your personal effects placed?" Napoleon doesn't turn from the window. "It doesn't matter. The staff needs direction on." "I said it doesn't matter." Henri Bertrand withdraws quietly. That night, Napoleon writes a letter to his mother in Rome. The British censor will read it before it's sent, but he writes it anyway. "I am on a rock in the ocean. I have a house. I have guards who watch me day and night. I have nothing else. This is where I will die." The letter takes 4 months to reach Rome. By then, he's already met the man who will make the next 6 years hell. April 14, 1816. 5 months into exile. The new governor of St. Helena arrives on the island. His name is Lieutenant General Sir Hudson Lowe, age 46, career British officer, competent, experienced, utterly unremarkable, except for one quality: he follows orders to the letter. The British government's orders are clear. Napoleon Bonaparte is the most dangerous prisoner in the world. He must be watched constantly. He must not escape. He must not become a martyr. He must not communicate freely with the outside world. He must be contained. Lowe intends to obey perfectly. April 17, 1816. First meeting. Lowe comes to Longwood House to formally introduce himself. Napoleon receives him in the drawing room. Bertrand and Montholon are present. British officers accompany Lowe. Lowe bows slightly. "General Bonaparte, I am Lieutenant General Sir Hudson Lowe, appointed by His Majesty's government as Governor of St. Helena. I come to inform you of the regulations governing your residence here." Napoleon doesn't stand. "You address me incorrectly." Lowe blinks. "I beg your pardon. I am not General Bonaparte. I am Emperor Napoleon. If you cannot use my proper title, we have nothing to discuss." The British government does not recognize any imperial title. The Treaty of Fontainebleau was signed under pressure and is therefore invalid. "I am Emperor of the French. You will address me as such, or you will not address me at all." Lowe's jaw tightens. "Sir, I have my instructions, and I have my dignity. This meeting is over." Napoleon stands and walks out of his own drawing room, leaving Lowe standing there. It sets the tone for the next 5 years. April to May 1816. The regulations. Lowe implements his orders. Regulation 1. A British officer must visually confirm Napoleon's presence twice daily, morning and evening, to verify he hasn't escaped. Napoleon refuses to present himself. "I am not a criminal to be inspected like livestock." Lowe insists. Napoleon has the servants bar the doors during inspection times. British officers are forced to peer through windows or wait for hours until Napoleon emerges naturally. Regulation 2. Napoleon cannot leave the Longwood grounds, roughly 12 square miles, without British military escort. Napoleon stops taking rides. He will not be paraded under armed guard like a common prisoner. Regulation 3. All correspondence must pass through the governor's office for inspection, incoming and outgoing. Letters arrive months late, opened, read, sometimes entire passages blacked out with ink. Napoleon's letters to family in Europe are censored. He begins writing in code, classical allusions, historical references only educated readers would understand. Regulation 4. Visitors require prior approval from the governor. Lowe denies most requests. Ship captains who want to meet the famous Napoleon are turned away. Sympathetic British officers stationed on the island are forbidden from socializing with the household. The isolation tightens. Regulation 5. Household expenses are limited to £8,000 per year, covered by the British government. It sounds generous. It's not. 28 people, servants' wages, food, wine, fuel, candles, repairs to the constantly deteriorating house, clothing, medical supplies. The money disappears fast. When Napoleon exceeds the budget, Lowe threatens to cut rations. Napoleon responds by selling his personal silver plate, piece by piece, to pay servants rather than beg the British for more funds. Every restriction is justified as necessary security. Every restriction is designed to humiliate. June 1816. Napoleon stops fighting the daily verification requirement through a different strategy. He simply ignores it. British officers arrive for morning inspection. They find the doors locked. Napoleon is inside somewhere, but he won't show himself. The officers wait, sometimes for hours. Eventually, Napoleon emerges to take breakfast or walk in the garden, and they confirm visual contact. It's a petty victory, but it's the only kind available. Lowe writes furious reports to London. Napoleon is being difficult. He refuses to cooperate with reasonable security measures. He insists on being treated as a sovereign rather than a prisoner. London's response: continue current restrictions. Do not relent. July to December 1816. The counterattack. Napoleon realizes something. He's lost the physical war. He cannot escape St. Helena. He cannot defeat Lowe's regulations. He cannot force the British to treat him with the dignity he believes he deserves. But he can still fight one battle, the battle for how history remembers him. He begins dictating memoirs. Every day for hours, he talks while Emmanuel Las Cases writes. Sometimes Bertrand or Montholin take dictation when Las Cases needs rest. Napoleon recounts his campaigns, Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram. He describes his strategies, his decisions, his vision for Europe. He casts himself as a champion of liberal reform opposed by backward monarchies, a man trying to spread Enlightenment ideals, legal equality, merit-based advancement, rational government across a continent chained to feudalism. He's selective. The hundreds of thousands dead in his wars become unfortunate necessities. The republics he overthrew become willing partners. The puppet monarchies he installed become liberated peoples. It's propaganda, but it's brilliant propaganda. Las Cases smuggles pages off the island through sympathetic visitors. The manuscripts reach publishers in London and Paris. They're printed, distributed, read across Europe. The British government is creating a martyr without realizing it. Every petty restriction Lowe enforces feeds the narrative, noble emperor persecuted by small-minded jailers. November 25, 1816. British guards search Las Cases' quarters and find uncensored letters hidden in his belongings. Letters to publishers. Letters to friends in Europe. Letters describing conditions at Longwood in ways designed to make people angry. Lowe calls Las Cases. You are kicked out of St. Helena for breaking the rules. You will leave on the next ship that comes. Las Cases argues. Napoleon argues. It doesn't matter. On December 1st, Las Cases is forced to leave the island. Napoleon loses his main secretary, his smartest friend, one of the few people he could have real smart conversations with. The household is down to 23 people. 1817. The household breaks apart. Longwood House is like a pressure cooker. 23 people squeezed into wet, moldy rooms. The same faces every day. The same talks. No way out. No privacy. The island's weather is terrible. Hot and sticky. Then sudden cold winds. The house leaks when it rains. Mold grows on walls, on clothing, on books. Arguments start over nothing. Who gets which rooms? Whose servants are being too loud? Who's getting more of Napoleon's attention? Gourgaud becomes very jealous of Montholon. Says he's controlling Napoleon. Montholon shoots back that Gourgaud is mentally unstable. They almost fight a duel. Napoleon has to physically pull them apart. Madame Bertrand, Bertrand's wife, hates Saint Helena. She never wanted to come. She did it because she was loyal to her husband, but she's miserable. She takes out her anger on the servants, on her children, on anyone nearby. The tension is constant, and Napoleon is starting to change. Mid-1817. The doctor. Napoleon's health has been getting worse slowly. Stomach pains, feeling sick, trouble eating rich foods. He blames the weather, the stress, the poor quality of food available on the island. His personal doctor is Barry O'Mara, an Irish surgeon from the Royal Navy who stayed on St. Helena specifically to treat Napoleon. O'Mara is good at his job and more importantly kind. He believes Napoleon is being treated badly. He says so in his reports. Hudson Lowe reads these reports and is furious. O'Mara is supposed to be checking the prisoner's health, not defending him. In July 1818, Lowe orders O'Mara kicked off the island for disobedience and bad behavior. Napoleon refuses to see the replacement British doctors Lowe sends. He doesn't trust them. He believes they're either not good at their job or actively trying to hurt him. For the next 3 years, Napoleon will have almost no medical care. Late 1817, the question. One evening, Napoleon sits with Bertrand in the billiard room. They're not playing, just sitting. The candles burn low. Bertrand asks, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Napoleon doesn't answer for a long time. Then, "I regret Russia. The campaign was wrong. The timing, the planning, the belief that Alexander would negotiate, all wrong. And the rest was necessary. France was surrounded by enemies. The revolution would have been crushed if we hadn't spread it by force. But it failed. We're here." Napoleon looks at him. "We're here because I stayed too long. I should have accepted peace in 1813, kept France's natural borders, and retired. But I couldn't see it then. And now it doesn't matter what I see. I'm on a rock. The war I can still fight is making sure history knows I was right." Pause here. We're halfway through this story. If you're still watching, if this battle between Napoleon and Lowe, between a prisoner fighting for respect and a guard enforcing small rules, if this matters to you, leave a comment. Tell me, would you rather die quickly with honor or slowly while fighting to control your own story? Because Napoleon chose the second option, and it's about to cost him everything. Subscribe if you want to see how this ends. The final collapse is coming. 1818-1819. Napoleon's routine gets smaller. He used to walk the grounds daily. Now he goes days without leaving his rooms. He used to eat with his household. Now he often eats alone or not at all. He's gaining weight despite eating less. His body is bloating in strange ways, stomach swelling while his face gets thinner. He complains of constant pain in his right side. When he does come out, his moods swing wildly. Sometimes he's energetic, dictating memoirs for hours, sharp and focused. Other times he's withdrawn, barely speaking, staring at nothing. Gourgaud can't take it anymore. The loneliness, the arguments, Napoleon's strange behavior. In March 1818, he asks permission to leave the island. Napoleon doesn't fight it. "Go save yourself." Gourgaud leaves in April. The household is down to 19 people. December 1819. Monthalin's wife announces she's leaving St. Helena for health reasons. She's been sick often. The weather doesn't agree with her. That's the official story. The unofficial story, rumored but never proven, is that she's pregnant and the father might be Napoleon. She leaves in January 1820. 18 people remain. Napoleon is 50 years old. He looks 65. His hair is gray and thinning. His skin has a yellowish color. He moves slowly, stiffly, like every step hurts. And the pain in his side is getting worse. January 1820. Napoleon can no longer keep food down. Solid meals, meat, bread, anything substantial comes back up within an hour. Sometimes within minutes. He switches to soups, broths, wine mixed heavily with water. Even that doesn't always stay down. The pain in his right side, which has been on and off for 2 years, is now constant. A deep grinding ache that gets worse after eating. He presses his hand against his stomach, trying to ease it. Nothing helps. Bertrand suggests calling for a doctor. No British doctors. Sire, you need medical attention. I need nothing from them. They'll either kill me through being bad at their job or report everything to Lowe. Either way, no. Bertrand doesn't push. There's no point. March 1820. Napoleon stops leaving his bedroom except when absolutely necessary. The walk from his bedroom to the drawing room, maybe 30 feet, exhausts him. He shuffles rather than walks. One hand on the wall for balance. His breathing is hard. He spends most days in bed, curtains closed, room dark. Sometimes he sleeps. Sometimes he just lies there staring at the ceiling. When Monthalin visits to ask if he wants to dictate more memoirs, Napoleon waves him away. Not today. Tomorrow then? Maybe. Tomorrow comes. Same answer. The memoirs stop. The one project that gave his exile meaning, the battle for his legacy. Abandoned because he doesn't have the strength. May 1820. Hudson Lowe receives reports that Napoleon is seriously ill. Lowe sends a British naval surgeon, Dr. John Stokey, to examine him. Napoleon first refuses, but the pain is so bad now that he agrees. Stokey examines him, presses on the stomach. Napoleon flinches. He asks about symptoms, takes notes. His conclusion, chronic hepatitis, possibly made worse by stomach disease. He recommends rest, bland diet, no alcohol, regular checkups. Stokey submits his report to Lowe. In it, he states that the patient's condition is serious and the weather and conditions at Longwood are likely making things worse. Lowe reads the report and is furious. This sounds like criticism of how Napoleon is being treated. Sounds like ammunition for supporters in Europe who claim Britain is slowly killing him through neglect. Lowe dismisses Stokey from service and forbids him from talking about the case. Napoleon hears about this and laughs bitterly. See, I was right. They want me dead, but don't want the blame. He refuses all further British medical attention. July 1820. Napoleon's stomach is visibly swollen now. His body is doing something strange, gaining size in his midsection while the rest of him wastes away. His legs are thin, his face hollow, but his belly sticks out like he's pregnant. He can't stand up straight without pain. He shuffles, bent forward slightly, one hand pressed to his side. His skin has a yellowish color, jaundice. His eyes, once sharp and piercing, are dull. He's 51 years old. September 1820. Bertrand writes in his private journal. The emperor rarely speaks now. He takes perhaps 1 meal per day, usually just broth. He has not left his rooms in 3 weeks. When I visit, he acknowledges me, but does not talk. He seems to be waiting. Waiting for what? Death. October 1820. Napoleon has a brief rally. For a few days, the pain lessens slightly. He manages to eat a small meal. Fish and vegetables. Keeps it down. He even takes a short walk in the garden. Montholin is encouraged. You're improving. Napoleon shakes his head. This is temporary. The disease is giving me a moment to prepare. Prepare for what? The end. 3 days later, the pain returns worse than before. January 1821. Napoleon calls for Montholin and Bertrand. He wants to dictate his last will and testament. They bring writing materials. Napoleon, lying in bed, propped up on pillows, speaks slowly, pausing often when pain spikes. I die before my time, murdered by the English government and its hired killer. The British people will avenge me before long. Bertrand writes it down word for word. Napoleon continues. Detailed instructions. His body is to be examined after death. He wants the world to know exactly what killed him. His remains are to be buried on St. Helena since France has refused him. But he expresses hope they'll eventually rest in Paris on the banks of the Seine among the French people I loved. His possessions, what few remain, are given to his followers. Money to servants, personal items to Bertrand, Montholin, others who stayed loyal. He settles debts, names people who owe him money, people he owes. It takes 3 days to complete. He has to rest often. Sometimes the pain is so bad he can't speak, but he finishes it. The will is witnessed, signed, sealed. Now there's nothing left to do but wait. March 1821. Napoleon asks for a priest. He hasn't been very religious most of his life. He used the church when it helped him politically. He signed an agreement with the Pope to stabilize France, then kidnapped the same Pope when he became a problem. But now dying, he wants last rites. A Catholic priest assigned to the island, Abbé Venali, begins visiting regularly. Napoleon confesses, receives communion. Is it real faith, political planning to shape his legacy as a good Catholic? Simple human fear facing the unknown? Probably all three. The visits continue through March and April. April 1821. Napoleon is stuck in bed full-time now. He vomits black bile, partially digested blood from internal bleeding. The vomit smells like rot. Servants clean it up, change his sheets, try to make him comfortable. His pulse is weak and irregular. Some days it races. 120, 130 beats per minute. Other days it's barely there. He drifts in and out of consciousness. When awake, he's often confused. Sometimes he speaks in Italian, his native Corsican dialect, about his childhood, his mother, his brothers. Sometimes French, giving orders to marshals who aren't there. Tell Ney to hold the left. Davout, bring up the reserves. Sometimes he mumbles about Josephine. She's been dead 7 years, but in his confusion, she's still alive. Josephine, where are you? Come back. The household takes turns sitting watch. There's nothing they can do medically. Just be present. Bear witness. April 28, 1821. British officials hearing Napoleon is near death send doctors to examine him whether he agrees or not. They need records. When he dies, there will be accusations. The British government needs official medical records stating they provided care and the death was from natural causes. Dr. Archibald Arnott, principal medical officer on St. Helena, enters Napoleon's bedroom. Napoleon is barely conscious, doesn't resist the examination. Arnott checks his pulse. Weak, irregular. Presses on the stomach, hugely swollen, hard. Listens to his breathing. Shallow, hard. Checks his eyes. Jaundiced, pupils slow. Arnott's private opinion. Advanced stomach cancer, possibly torn through. Liver problems. Days left, maybe a week. He prescribes calomel, a mercury compound used to clean out the system. It's the standard treatment for almost everything in 1821. It will do nothing except possibly make Napoleon's final days worse. May the 1st, 1821. Napoleon has moments of clearness now, but they're brief. During one, Bertrand sits beside the bed. Napoleon grabs his hand. Henri, you stayed. Of course, sire. Why? Because you're my emperor. Because I gave my word. Your word to a dying man on a rock. Was it worth it? Bertrand's eyes fill with tears. Yes. Napoleon nods, closes his eyes, drifts back into confusion. May 3, 1821. The household gathers. Everyone knows this is the end. Bertrand and his wife. Montholin, the servants, the priest. British officers assigned to witness. Dr. Arnott and another British doctor. Guards at the door. 28 people total in and around the small bedroom. Napoleon is unconscious most of the time now. His breathing has changed. Irregular gasping. Sometimes long pauses between breaths where everyone thinks he's gone. Then a sudden gasp. His face is unrecognizable. Bloated, yellowish, waxy. His hair plastered to his skull with sweat. His hands, once strong enough to control the destiny of Europe, now lie still on the blanket. May 4, 1821. The vigil continues. No one leaves except for brief moments. Napoleon hasn't opened his eyes in 24 hours. Hasn't spoken a clear word in longer. But he mumbles. Fragments, single words, sometimes just sounds. France, army. Josephine ahead of the army. The priest gives final rites again. Napoleon doesn't respond. Might not even know it's happening. Outside, the wind howls across Longwood's plateau. Rain drums on the roof. The same terrible St. Helena weather that's defined the last 6 years. Inside, candlelight flickers. The room smells of sickness and death. Everyone waits. May 5, 1821. Dawn. Napoleon is still breathing, barely. His pulse is almost gone, his skin cold and clammy. The spaces between breaths growing longer. Bertrand holds one hand, Montholin the other. The priest murmurs prayers. The British doctors watch and take notes. 11 a.m. Still breathing. 2 p.m. Still breathing. 5 p.m. The sun is setting. The room darkens. Someone lights more candles. 5:30 p.m. Napoleon's breathing changes again. Very shallow now. Very slow. 5:45 p.m. Everyone in the room falls silent, watching. 5:49 p.m. Napoleon Bonaparte takes a final rattling breath, holds it, releases it slowly. Nothing follows. Dr. Arnott checks for a pulse, waits, checks again. He's gone. The man who commanded 70 million Europeans, who crowned himself emperor, who reshaped the map of Europe, who survived Russia, Leipzig, Waterloo, and 6 years on this rock, dead at 51 in a converted barn on an island in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by 28 people. From 70 million to 28. The priest makes the sign of the cross and begins final prayers. Outside, the rain continues to fall. May 6, 1821. The next morning, the British need to know what killed him. Officially, documented, witnessed. Because the moment news reaches Europe, accusations will fly. The French will claim murder. Supporters will claim deliberate neglect. Political enemies of the British government will use this as ammunition. So, at 2 p.m. on May 6, less than 24 hours after death, doctors gather in Longwood House's billiard room to perform an autopsy. Present, Dr. Archibald Arnott, British. Dr. Charles Mitchell, British. Dr. Francis Burton, British. 5 other British medical officers, and 3 members of Napoleon's household who insist on being there. Bertrand, Montholin, and Dr. Francesco Antamarchi, a Corsican doctor who arrived on the island in 1819, but whom Napoleon rarely trusted. Napoleon's body lies on the billiard table. The procedure: Dr. Arnott makes the first cut, chest to stomach. What they find is worse than expected. The stomach is very diseased. A large tumor-like growth near the pylorus, the opening where the stomach connects to the small intestine. The tumor is about the size of a hand. In several places, it has torn completely through the stomach wall. The surrounding tissue is swollen, damaged. The stomach lining is covered in sores. The liver is swollen, roughly twice normal size, and shows signs of hepatitis. Other organs show general damage consistent with long-term illness. Dr. Arnott tells his findings to a clerk who records everything. The British doctors talk quietly. The diagnosis is clear. Gastric carcinoma, stomach cancer, advanced terminal. The French observers disagree immediately. The dispute. Antimarchi examines the stomach himself. He agrees there's a tumor, but he insists the liver disease is the main cause of death, not the cancer. And the liver disease, he suggests, was caused or made worse by the weather at St. Helena, the humidity, the poor airflow in Longwood House, the stress. He's building a case. The British killed Napoleon through deliberate mistreatment. Montholin goes further. He points to the widespread sores. How do we know this wasn't caused by poison? Arsenic causes stomach sores. Dr. Arnott responds coldly. Arsenic poisoning presents with very different symptoms. This is cancer. Long-term, developed over years. Convenient that you find natural causes. I find what the evidence shows. The argument continues for an hour. Finally, they agree to disagree. The British will file their report stating stomach cancer as cause of death. The French observers will file a disagreeing opinion suggesting environmental factors and possible poisoning contributed. Both reports will be published. Both will fuel 200 years of controversy. What they don't know. In 1961, samples of Napoleon's hair preserved by his household members after death will be tested using modern science techniques. The tests will show high levels of arsenic. This will create theories he was deliberately poisoned by the British, by Montholin, by someone in his household. Further testing in 2005 and 2008 will show arsenic levels high but not immediately toxic, and similar levels are found in hair samples from throughout his life, including childhood. The likely source: environmental. Arsenic compounds were used in everything in the early 19th century. Wallpaper dyes, paint, preservatives, medicines. Longwood House's wallpaper specifically contained Scheele's green, a copper arsenic compound that in wet conditions releases poisonous fumes. Napoleon spent 6 years in wet rooms with poisonous wallpaper breathing low levels of arsenic. It probably didn't help. It might have speeded up the cancer's growth, but it likely didn't cause death directly. The cancer killed him. The British government's conditions at Longwood probably made it worse. Whether that means murder or carelessness or just bad luck is the question everyone will argue about forever. May 7, 1821. Napoleon's body is placed in 4 nested coffins. First, a tin coffin sealed shut. Second, a mahogany coffin. Third, a lead coffin, also sealed shut. Fourth, another mahogany coffin. The reason: preserve the body as long as possible in case it's eventually returned to France. The sealed coffins are placed in Longwood House's chapel while funeral arrangements are made. May 9, 1821. The burial. The funeral procession leaves Longwood at 1 p.m. Napoleon's coffin is carried on a hearse pulled by 4 horses. British troops line the route. Officers, enlisted men. The entire garrison of St. Helena, roughly 2,800 soldiers. The procession moves slowly down from the plateau towards Seine Valley, a small green valley about 3 miles from Longwood. Napoleon had walked there years earlier and told Bertrand, "If I die here, this is where I want to rest, near the spring under the willows." The British remembered. 1,500 people attend the funeral, the entire population of the island. British officers and enlisted men, civilians, slaves, Napoleon's household, French sailors from ships currently in harbor. It's respectful, formal. Cannons fire a salute. British troops present arms. The priest conducts a full Catholic funeral mass. But there's one problem. The tombstone. The British want it carved Napoleon Bonaparte. Bertrand and Montholin insist it read Emperor Napoleon or Napoleon I, Emperor of the French. Hudson Lowe refuses to recognize any imperial title. They argue for 2 days. No agreement is reached. So the grave is left unmarked. Just a blank stone slab over the vault where Napoleon's 4 coffins rest. For 19 years, the grave of one of history's most famous men will have no name on it. May 10, 1821. The day after the funeral, the British government receives official notice of Napoleon's death. They immediately release the news to European capitals and newspapers. The reaction is mixed. In France, royalists celebrate quietly. The Bourbon monarchy is safer now, but many French citizens, especially veterans, mourn. He was still their emperor, whatever the government said. In Britain, there's relief. The great enemy is finally gone. No more escape attempts. No more political problems. Some sympathy too. Even enemies admit he was a remarkable man who died in sad circumstances. In Austria, Russia, Prussia, the powers who fought him for 20 years. Satisfaction. The last threat to the post, 1815 order is gone. But across Europe, liberals and romantics begin transforming Napoleon into legend. The great man brought down by small-minded reactionaries. The champion of merit and reform destroyed by hereditary monarchies who feared change. The myth-making begins immediately, and Napoleon, even dead, starts winning the battle he cared about most. 1821 to 1840. The unmarked grave. For 19 years, Napoleon's body rests in Seine Valley under an unmarked stone. Ships visiting St. Helena often make pilgrimages to the grave. Officers, travelers, curiosity seekers. They stand at the unmarked tomb and wonder about the man buried there. Hudson Lowe remains governor until 1821 when he's transferred. He spends the rest of his life defending his treatment of Napoleon, publishes justifications, writes letters, argues he was just following orders. History doesn't care. He's remembered as the small tyrant who tormented a great man. Bertrand returns to France in 1821. He publishes his journals from St. Helena. They become bestsellers, detailed accounts of Napoleon's exile, suffering, and death. Montholon returns in 1821. He also publishes memoirs. Makes a comfortable living from Napoleon's name. Las Cases, kicked out in 1816, published his account in 1823. Memorial de Sainte Helene. It becomes one of the most powerful books of the 19th century. Shapes how an entire generation understands Napoleon, not as dictator, but as tragic hero. The memoirs Napoleon dictated during exile spread across Europe. They're translated into multiple languages, read by millions. Napoleon is more famous dead than he was in his final years alive. 1840, the return. In 1840, the French government under King Louis-Philippe makes a decision. Bring Napoleon's remains back to France. The reason is partly political. The July monarchy is trying to prove itself by connecting with Napoleonic glory. Partly it's genuine feeling. By 1840, Napoleon has become a symbol of French greatness. Even royalists reluctantly acknowledge his achievements. In October 1840, a French frigate, the Belle Poule, arrives at St. Helena with official orders to dig up and return Napoleon's remains. British authorities cooperate. They no longer care. The man is dead. The threat is gone. On October 15, 1840, exactly 25 years after Napoleon first arrived as a prisoner, the grave in Seine Valley is opened. When they remove the 4 coffins and open them, the body is remarkably well preserved. The multiple sealed coffins did their job. Napoleon is recognizable. The face, though damaged, is still his. They transfer the remains to a new coffin and load it aboard the Belle Poule. The ship leaves St. Helena on October 18. December 15, 1840. Paris. Napoleon comes home. The Belle Poule docks at Cherbourg. The coffin is moved to an elaborate funeral carriage. The procession moves to Paris. On December 15, 1840, Napoleon's remains are carried through Paris to Les Invalides, a military complex with a domed church. Over 1 million people line the streets. Veterans of the Grand Army, now in their 60s and 70s, stand in their old uniforms, crying openly. Civilians throw flowers. The crowd is silent except for quiet sobbing. The procession takes hours. When it finally reaches Les Invalides, a full state funeral is held. The coffin is placed in a temporary vault in the chapel. In 1861, after years of construction, Napoleon's remains are moved to their final resting place, a massive tomb of red quartzite in a circular crypt directly under the dome of Les Invalides. The tomb is surrounded by statues representing his victories. Inscriptions list his achievements. The location is designed to inspire awe. You walk down into the crypt and look down at the tomb as if paying respect to a god. Napoleon wanted to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people I loved. He got his wish. 20 years late, but he got it. The numbers. Napoleon died with 28 people who cared enough to be there. His funeral in Paris drew over 1 million. Today, his tomb at Les Invalides attracts roughly 1.5 million visitors per year. More than 200 years after his death, people still come to pay respects or simply stare in wonder at what he was. His legal code, the Napoleonic Code, forms the basis of civil law in more than 70 countries. His military tactics are still studied in war colleges worldwide. His name means ambition, genius, rise and fall. Hudson Lowe died in 1844, largely forgotten except as the man who guarded Napoleon. The British government's plan, exile Napoleon where he couldn't cause trouble, contain him until he died naturally. Avoid making him a martyr. Failed completely. They controlled his body. He controlled his story. And in the end, the story mattered more. But here's the question we still need to answer. Was Saint Helena justice or cruelty? Napoleon's wars killed millions. Conservative estimates put the Napoleonic Wars' death toll at 3 to 6 million military and civilian deaths. He overthrew republics, put in puppet monarchies, brought back slavery in French colonies after the Revolution had abolished it. Ruled as a dictator. From one view, exile was mercy. The traditional punishment for defeated rulers was execution. The British could have hanged him. They didn't. From another view, 6 years of systematic humiliation in a wet house on a rock, denied proper medical care, subjected to small bureaucratic tyranny, cut off from the world, was torture. A slow death designed to break him while avoiding the appearance of cruelty. Both are true, and that's what makes it matter. The numbers tell a story. Napoleon Bonaparte commanded the fate of 70 million Europeans at the height of his power in 1812. He died with 28 people in the room. That's a 99.9996% reduction in 6 years. From emperor to exile, from palaces to a converted barn. From reviewing armies of hundreds of thousands to counting the same 27 faces every single day. If you measure power by territory controlled, armies commanded, people governed, Napoleon lost everything. But if you measure power by memory, by influence, by how history remembers you, he never lost it all. Think about what happened after his death. The British government thought they'd contained the problem. Exile him where he can't escape. Let him die naturally. Avoid making him a martyr. They failed on that last part. The memoirs Napoleon dictated at Longwood, the ones smuggled off the island and published across Europe, shaped how an entire generation understood him, not as a tyrant defeated, but as a champion of merit and reform, crushed by reactionary monarchies who feared change. By 1848, just 27 years after his death, revolutions swept across Europe. France, Germany, Italy, Austria. People rose up demanding constitutions, civil rights, governments based on merit rather than birth. The revolutionaries carried portraits of Napoleon. They quoted his legal code. They used his name as proof that one determined man could reshape the world. Napoleon's ideas, legal equality, centralized government, careers open to talent, non-religious education, survived him and spread farther than his armies ever reached. The British won the war. Napoleon won the legacy. But that doesn't answer the harder question. Did he deserve to? Here's what Napoleon actually did. Stripped of romantic myth, he started or continued wars that killed between 3 and 6 million people across 2 decades. Soldiers, civilians, entire villages burned, families destroyed. He overthrew the republics he claimed to be defending, turned them into monarchies with his relatives on the thrones. He brought back slavery in French Caribbean colonies after the Revolution had abolished it because sugar plantations were profitable and he needed money for his wars. He crowned himself emperor and ruled as an autocrat. Freedom of press, gone. Political opposition, crushed. Elections, theater. The man who claimed to spread Enlightenment values built an empire on the corpses of millions and the crushing of the very liberties he pretended to champion. So when he died on St. Helena in pain, isolated, humiliated, was that justice? Maybe. But here's the part that's uncomfortable. Whether it was justice or not doesn't change the fact that he won the battle that mattered to him. Napoleon understood something most people don't. You can lose everything, empire, throne, freedom, even your life, and still win if you control how you're remembered. History isn't what happened. History is what we're told happened. And the person who tells the best story wins, even after death. Napoleon spent 6 years on St. Helena fighting one final campaign. Not for territory, not for political power, for control of the story. Every memoir page he dictated was a strategic move. Every letter smuggled off the island was propaganda. Every interaction with British officers was performance, charming them, making them like him, making sure they describe him kindly in their journals. He was building the legend that would outlast the man. And it worked. Today, 200 years after his death, Napoleon's tomb draws 1.5 million visitors annually. His name is taught in every history class. His military strategies are studied. His legal code forms the foundation of law in dozens of countries. Hudson Lowe, the man who defeated him by keeping him caged for 6 years, is a footnote remembered only as the small bureaucrat who made Napoleon's final years miserable. Napoleon lost the physical war. He won the memory war. That's both inspiring and terrifying. Here's why. It's terrifying. It means dictators and conquerors who destroy millions of lives can still win in history if they craft the right story. It means the victims, the 3 to 6 million dead in the Napoleonic Wars, the slaves he re-enslaved, the republics he destroyed, they don't get to tell their story. They're absorbed into the legend of the great man who trampled them. It means we, the people reading history, have to constantly ask, whose story are we hearing? Who's not in the story? What's being left out to make the hero look better? Napoleon's memoirs don't talk much about the 600,000 who died in Russia. They don't mention the Spanish civilians killed during his occupation. They don't discuss the Haitian Revolution he tried to crush. Those stories got buried under the legend of the genius general brought down by circumstances. So here's the question you need to answer. Was Napoleon a great man destroyed by average enemies and cruel fate? Or was he a tyrant who got off easy, living in exile instead of facing execution, dying from disease instead of the rope? There's no clean answer. And that's exactly why this story matters. History isn't simple. Great men do terrible things. Terrible men do great things. The same person can be both liberator and oppressor, genius and monster, victim and perpetrator. Napoleon was all of it. And St. Helena, where he went from commanding 70 million to dying with 28, is where all of it collapsed into one man in a room, fighting for one last thing he could control. How you remember him. If this story made you think, if it changed how you see power, legacy, or the stories we tell about history, I need you to do something. Leave a comment. Tell me, was St. Helena justice or cruelty? Did Napoleon deserve what happened to him? Is it possible to be both a great man and a monster? There are no wrong answers, but the conversation matters. Share this if you think others need to sit with these uncomfortable questions. Subscribe if you want more history that refuses to give you easy heroes and simple villains because the real world doesn't have those. It has complicated people making terrible and brilliant decisions. And we only understand them when we're willing to see all of it. The genius and the monstrosity, the achievement and the cost. Napoleon commanded 70 million and died with 28. But 200 years later, millions still visit his tomb. Millions still say his name. Millions still argue about what he meant. He lost everything. and he won the only thing that lasts. Whether he deserved to is the question that will never die. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.